In this lesson, let's dive a little bit more detail on the specifics of brand and how it's a form of defensibility and improves the underlying components of our growth model. To quantitative marketers or product managers, brand can be an incredibly hard thing to think about. It feels untangible, untrackable, unmeasurable, almost like black magic. And this feels like to us, and brand gets a bad rap because it's commonly used as an excuse for failed campaigns. There is a lot of waste out there where we equate brand with blasting a generic message and using it as an excuse to not measure the results of those campaigns. But we believe that there is a better view on brand that ties to the underlying concepts that we've been talking about. We specifically view brand as a reinforcing loop around the primary emotional constraint as a product. Let's break this down into its pieces. Let's first look at the steps of a brand loop. A brand starts by solving and communicating the primary emotional constraint for adoption around that product. So as that brand is recognized by a user, it helps increase acquisition, retention, and monetization. And as that happens, customers reinforce the brand around that primary emotional constraint, increasing that brand presence, fueling the loop even further. Let's talk about that centerpiece, that primary emotional constraint, and walk through this in a little bit more detail. Every product needs to tap into a core emotion. We talked about in the user psychology module about how every decision and action starts with emotional fuel, and that goes for adopting and retaining on a product. Now, there's typically an emotion that is dominant for every target audience within a product category. Let's look at a market that we'd all be familiar with to show this off. Let's look at the market of users buying cars. If we broke this market down into different segments based on the primary emotional thing that they cared about in the car buying process, we would probably find it segmented like this. We'd find an audience that primarily cared about safety, another around adventure, another around durability, another around it being eco-friendly, and another around the car being a status symbol. And what we find is that there are specific cars or brands that align to each one of these emotional constraints. Volvo indexes highly on safety, Jeep on adventure, the Ford F-150 truck on durability, the Prius on being eco-friendly, and a Porsche being a status symbol. So we can view this the same way in the tech industry. Let's take something like a market of cryptocurrency, where the primary emotional constraint to the mass market right now is something of around trust or simplicity. There's a lot of fraud right now, so trust is very important, and cryptocurrency seems like a very complicated thing to buy, so simplicity is another primary emotional constraint. And of course, we see one of the best performing products within this category index highly on both of these things, Coinbase, where they communicate primarily and index highly on being the easiest and most trusted place to buy, sell, and manage the digital currency. We can also take a look at the online education space, where one of the primary emotional constraints is on who is teaching the course and that expertise. Here we found the fast-growing product of Masterclass, which takes world celebrities and experts around topics like cooking, poker, writing, and acting, and develop courses. And you can see here that they're heavily using the brand of those people to solve around and communicate around that primary emotional constraint. Let's think about a market such as men's health, something like hair loss or erectile dysfunction, or some of these other embarrassing men's health topics. The primary emotional constraint here is that we would view these topics mostly as embarrassing or only for old people. Here we found one of the fastest growing e-commerce companies of the past 20 years, Hims. And so what they've done with their brand is they're primarily communicating it around being for a younger audience and it not being an embarrassing topic, something that a lot of males actually endure. And so Hims here fills this category around this primary emotional constraint for the category market of men's health. Sometimes the main emotional constraint is that the ocean actually isn't big enough for this specific offering. Here we see companies playing a game of category creation. For example, in the market of marketing tools, we found HubSpot develop the category and define inbound marketing. They use this as a way to communicate to marketers about how their system and their tools were different than the marketing methodologies that they were taking currently. We've then seen the next evolution of the marketing and sales tool space, where we've seen a recent player, Drift, coin the term and create the category of conversational marketing. Once again, communicating to their customers that the existing tactics that they are taking are no longer working and that they've got a new methodology and tool behind a new approach. We've also seen this in spaces like customer support with coining the category of customer success, where we've seen the company Gainsight play very well. Now, in this, when we think about brand as a loop, the key question is how are the customers or the company reinforcing around the primary emotional constraint that helps develop and grow the brand over time? Well, if we looked at something like Drift, which has created that category of conversational marketing, they and their customers have taken a number of actions to reinforce the brand around this primary emotional constraint. First of all, Drift defined and named the category. They created a conversational marketing university where you can learn about conversational marketing, get a credential posted to your profile, once again reinforcing that brand in that category. They've also changed the titles of their marketers and salespeople to be conversational marketers, conversational salespeople, and you've seen others in the industry take and follow suit. They've also gotten G2 Crowd and Gartner to recognize conversational marketing as a new category of software, as well as getting customers and partners to write about the topic of conversational marketing. So here that you can see customers, the company, and partners all take actions to reinforce the brand around that primary emotional constraint. But the other question that we need to address here is how does brand actually impact our growth model? That second step of the brand loop where the brand helps increase retention, acquisition, and monetization. Well, it helps us do this in a few different places. The first is that it reduces the friction around our acquisition loop and helps improve the conversion numbers in those conversion variables, helping increase the output of that loop and decreasing costs. So you could see here with Masterclass, which leverages the brands of their teachers and of their celebrities in a paid acquisition loop. So here you can see examples of Facebook ads using the brands of Gordon Ramsay, Malcolm Gladwell, and Gary Kasparov in those Facebook ads. So if we looked at the steps of the paid marketing loop where a new user signs up, a certain percentage pay, then we use that capital to buy more ads, and then a percentage act on those ads in order to repeat the cycles of a loop. That brand is going to do a few things. The first is that we're going to see an increase in the click-through rates and the percentage of people who click on that ad. People recognize those brands, and therefore it's going to produce higher click-through rates. We are then going to see a higher percentage of people sign up because of those brands, and a higher percentage of people convert to paying customers because of those brands. All of those things equate to getting more capital out of those ads and being able to reinvest more capital into buying more ads, accelerating, repeating the steps of the loops over time. Brand also helps increase retention due to increased psychological switching costs. The thing about brands as they grow over time is that customers always default towards what's familiar and what is recognized by others as solving for that primary emotional constraint for that specific target audience. As a result, they end up retaining longer rather than taking on those psychological switching costs to a new product in a new brand. Brand also helps us increase monetization due to a higher willingness to pay. We end up paying more for something that we directly identify around that primary emotional constraint that we personally care for. We can see this in products like Apple computers or watches in the iPhone, where we pay a premium based on that brand recognition. In the next lesson, we want to move on to our third form of defensibility, which is embedding, and talk specifically how it helps improve the underlying pieces of our growth model.